Yeah, 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 yeah. You're now tuned into the one and only place where you can get what's needed on your plate along with what's going on in your hood. Candy Lady's gonna keep you up to date with events going on round your way. What's really good? SC by Black locally. Keep them dollars circulating in your own community. It's the SCBBL show. You're now tuned into the SCBBL show. Rock, rock, rock on. Rock, 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 rock on.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the SCBBL show. Today, I am so excited because it is Tuesday, October 13th, and we have 2020 elections quickly approaching us. So this month, we're going to be spending some time with our local candidates that's running for different offices. And today, we have the series starting off with Attorney Ben Pogue. Welcome, Ben. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Candace. I'm really privileged to be here. I really am. It's fantastic. I love the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being one of our guests. I was just telling Ben, I think he's one of my first white guests on the show. So
that's great. Like I said, that's really an honor. I appreciate it.
So Ben, one of my good friends, Lee Moultrie, sends his hellos to you.
Great. I love Lee Moultrie. I love Lee Moultrie. Lee is a great guy to sit and have coffee with. Lee and I had coffee for 3 hours one day, and a lot of it, as it should be, as the conversations that are uncomfortable a lot of times these days, as they should be, is a person who looks like me, who has a more limited experience, life experience, listening. Yeah. But he is a great and really brilliant guy to listen to, and I think that's maybe part of the solution is to have more people who look like me doing a whole lot more listening and opening up and recognizing that we don't have the answers, that things we thought were answers are not. They're not the right answers.
Definitely. He's one of our advisors for South Carolina by Black locally.
Yeah, great guy.
So Ben, tell people a little bit about yourself. I know that you do a ton of advertisement, but no matter how much advertisement you do, sometimes people still just miss it. So give people a little bit of your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up just south of the Washington, D.C. area on the Virginia side. I was there until I went to school up in Virginia. And then I was in Richmond for a few years. My first wife was in medical school there. And then I moved down here in 1995. My first career was as the morning meteorologist over on Channel 2. So, we were talking about how I know I have a shiny forehead. And I used to have to put on makeup, but I don't put on makeup anymore. So I did that for about 10 years. One of the reasons I did that as a career, I chose that career path, was because it was really it was all about helping folks in need and keeping people safe when there's a real threat of harm there. So the time I liked to shine was when we had tornado outbreaks and hurricanes coming by, and even in between those times, doing the outreach in the community, especially in communities where we didn't have great educational or economic resources, because those are the folks who you need to watch out for the most, who are the least brought on board with what they really need, resources that they need, information that they need. And through that experience, it allowed me to do more nonprofit work. But I gave up my job as a broadcast meteorologist after Hurricane Katrina hit, because and by that time I was married to Nina Sossman Pogue. Now she's Nina Sossman.
Hi, Nina.
She's out there in virtual land someplace, waiting at home. But it was really, Candace, about we had a purpose in serving our community when I was doing the weather thing. And then you see what's going on down there. And I knew meteorologists who are in the New Orleans area. And I knew that they had tried to talk to government officials and said, this is a real possibility. And here's who's going to get hurt. And they knew it. Candace, they knew who was going to pay. They knew who was going to die from flooding issues down there. And the government officials didn't do anything about it. They didn't do what they knew they needed to do. So I'd sort of had enough of it. And I went to my news director and I said, hey, can I bring a camera or something like that? But I think I need to go down there. I feel called to that. They said, no, you can't do that. So I said, I quit. And my incredible wife was really supportive of that and said, yep, just go. And so I went and volunteered at the Red Cross, ran a shelter in a little town called Lufkin, Texas. Walked into it, and 15 minutes later, the people who had been running it were like, we're out. You got to clean the bathroom. You're in charge of 650 people. It was a really unique experience, but I came back home from that knowing that I needed to do something different with my life. And I felt that that was through law and through individual advocacy, really helping folks who are at a tough time in their life. And that's what my life as a lawyer has been about. A lot of times as a trial lawyer, for me, almost exclusively in civil litigation, helping people who are being sued or helping people sue somebody else when there's an injury, sometimes when it's a corporation, sometimes you're trying to help people keep their job, all different kinds of real life circumstances. And then toward the end of my legal career, I got more into mediation. Well, largely from the people who I had tried cases against, my attorneys who were my opponents. But if you get along with folks and you demonstrate that you can bring people together, you end up becoming a mediator. And that's really what it is all about. You find people with disputes, they come to you and you help them resolve those disputes, learn a little bit about each other, help grasp that there are shared values and similar life experiences, and that we can really come together on almost any issue if you have a skilled person bringing you together to find those solutions. Wow. So that's sort of briefly who I am. Folks ask why I'm running for this office. That sort of goes way back to the way my parents raised me. The first things that I was involved in as a kid was homeless advocacy, working with a really serious homeless problem on top of a massive drug problem in Washington, D.C. area. And on top of that, mental health institutions were deinstitutionalizing. They're putting folks out in the street, largely people of color. So we had just a really awful situation. I first started getting into that when I was 10 years old and really built from there. But my parents' overarching thought process and what they taught to us and what Nina and I teach to our kids is, when you see people in pain, when you see unfairness and you don't do something about it, then you're part of the problem.
Exactly.
You've got this responsibility. So now we fast forward to this part in my life. And Candace, there's just no part of our governmental and political system where the punishments and the trauma to individuals is as great as in the world of crime and violence and how our justice system handles or doesn't handles or makes worse those situations. And there's nobody who's in a better position to actually help, to step up and have the resources to run, be able to really put it out there on the line and do the advocacy and have those uncomfortable conversations than somebody like me. So,
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, I must say that I respect you as an individual. Not outside of a candidate. I respect you as an individual because you can tell the character of someone by their actions. I first met you at Ralph Perlow's event.
Yeah.
You were out there. You talked a lot about outside of that, as I mentioned, you are a guest on the show because you want to reach as many people as possible. And when I saw the post on your page about if you're 38 or younger, this is your first time even having an option. And that really hit home for me because I went back down memory lane. Like every time you go to the polls, you did just see that one name there. You didn't have an option. And that's the case for many offices in around the counties of South Carolina and probably other places as well. Even still being called solicitor in the state of South Carolina, a lot of terminology, things go over people's heads. Just talk about, from your perspective, what is a DA/solicitor even responsible for? And shout out to everybody who's here. Just put in the comments, vote. If you're online, put in the comments, vote either on YouTube and or Facebook, and make sure you're liking our page and subscribing to South Carolina by Black. So Ben, tell us a little bit more about what a solicitor is even responsible for.
Yeah, typically, Candace, people think district attorney, and that's really exactly what solicitor is. It's called district attorney almost everywhere else. Some places call it Commonwealth's attorney, some places call it Commonwealth's prosecutor, but everywhere else, in literally every other state besides South Carolina, the name of what it is tells you what it is, tells you what the office is about. So it is the district attorney or prosecutor in charge of prosecuting serious crimes. That's really the old way of thinking about it. But the job description is really to do justice in the realm of criminal justice. And actually, we try not to use the term criminal justice because that unfairly labels a lot of people who get dragged into the system for even minor offenses.
Yes.
We try and think of it as just the justice system, but it is the person who's in charge of prosecuting those serious crimes, running the solicitor's office, where there are 40 attorneys in Charleston and Berkeley County in the 9th Circuit. So wherever you are in Charleston or in Berkeley County, I'm on your ballot, the 9th Circuit, which is a really large area, 600,000 people or so.
Wow.
But if you just think about it the old institutional way of prosecuting crimes, this is the old mindset, the mass incarceration mindset that we, over the last 50 years of this mass incarceration era in the United States, it's been about thinking about putting people in prison. And I talked about this. That has been almost the only solution for any kind of crime or violence. But that's not the right way to do it. You would never think of a healthcare system that says, all we're going to do is have an emergency room for anybody who is sick or injured or in pain, and we're going to only have one treatment option. That doesn't make any sense. We've got a healthcare system where we focus on prevention and we focus on many different cures, and that the patient actually has a choice of those cures. Well, whether it's an offender or, more importantly, victims who have endured crime, they've only had this one option of prosecution and putting the offender in prison.
Yep.
It just doesn't work. So if you think of the solicitor as a district attorney whose job it is to do justice, then it opens you up to all these different kinds of ways that we can do prevention of crime and diversion programs that don't involve incarceration, that we can use to heal victims and to make sure offenders have a real path to success, rehabilitation, hopefully re-education in there, and becoming better human beings that are on the righteous path.
And I want everybody who's watching, the SCBBL watchers, to just know how important this specific office is. Because when it comes to the Black community, oftentimes we wonder why there's no Black men in the home, or children are without fathers, or things of that nature, and even the moms as well. It's because of who we have, you know, running the office. And it affects whether your son, brother, husband is coming home at night. And so, Ben, I want you to talk a little bit about why we should even trust you over the current incumbent when it comes down to that specific thing alone, you know, like where only certain people are being tried and things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit about why someone should trust you enough to vote for you over the current person and seat?
Yeah, absolutely, Candace. I mean, first of all, look at the last 13 years. We haven't had a real change from that mass incarceration mindset, but it's so much more than that. It's a failure of vision and a failure to recognize the racial bias that absolutely exists.
Yeah.
So we need a solicitor, first and foremost, who's ready to say that Black lives matter, because Black lives matter.
Yes.
We need somebody who's willing to admit that we have systemic racism in our justice system, and not just in our justice system, in so many other facets of our political and governmental spectrum. It exists. It is a reality. So that's number one. Right now, we don't have that. And the ramifications of having somebody in that office who fails to or simply won't admit that those things exist is that you don't get intentional change. A friend of mine, Sam Bellamy, talks about being intentional all the time. Be intentional. So the intention, if you understand that racial bias exists, if you understand that there's significant systemic racism, is that we're actually going to do something about it. Yep. And on top of that, you have to have somebody in that office who believes that inherently we can do something about it and that it is unacceptable not to do something about it. So that's why we came up with a real plan for racial equity in our justice system that will work. It's based on science, it's based on data, and it's based on really targeting the thing that needs to change the most, which is the mindset and the intentions and the incentives of the people who are involved. We got to change behaviors. We can't just push a policy onto this and say, now it's going to work. So 4-point plan. First has got to be hiring African-American attorneys. There's a lot that we can do, a lot that we need to do. And this is a multi-layered problem also, Candace. Right now we have one African-American attorney in an office of 40 attorneys.
Wow.
That communicates mistrust to the public.
Yes.
Our solicitor's office does not reflect with the decision makers. I'm not talking about administrative staff, because it's not right to say, oh, we have diversity because we have an administrative staff that matches our community. You have to have the decision makers, the influencers that are a diverse crowd as well. So hire African-American attorneys, that's job one. There's a lot that's involved in it, it's sort of having the right policies that make our office attractive to somebody, that we could go to an African-American who gets out of law school and we can say, you're going to really do some good for your community. You're not just going to be the same old prosecutor that we've always had that just puts people in prison.
Right.
But that's racially biased in itself.
Yep.
You got to make sure that you're doing your work recruiting at HBCUs, that you're adopting the policies and listening to the community about what the policies should be, not just saying, I'm going to impose this policy on top of you. So there are lots of things that we got to do, but it's a multifaceted plan, and that's job one. Job two is make sure that we have African-American jurors.
Yeah.
And for both of these things, we've heard, oh, it's too hard, or, oh, you know what this sounds like, oh, we can't find qualified candidates.
Yes.
You know that's baloney.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Or there are other reasons that we're striking jurors. There's a Supreme Court case called Batson, which says you can't strike a juror because of the color of their skin. But lawyers know that there are a whole bunch of other reasons you can use as proxies, like, tell me if this sounds familiar, that person didn't look like they're really engaged, or they didn't look like they're really listening, or maybe something about their appearance didn't sound right. All that is racially biased.
Exactly.
It's racially biased. And there's no reason that we should accept any of that.
Right.
On top of that, we should be doing the work to make sure that jurors get compensated fairly. $25 a day is not fair compensation. If you're an hourly worker and you're getting $25 a day to serve on the jury, that means you're paying a minimum of $75 to serve on the jury because you're not getting compensated on it. So it takes advocacy, and it takes just not striking jurors of color, which our current solicitor, according to a 2016 study, she strikes African-American jurors 7 times more often than white jurors.
Yep.
Now, me saying that's a 2016 study. So that's number two. Number three is to make sure our deputy solicitors are actually spending time in the community, not saying how great we are, but listening to the community members about what they think justice should be, what it means to them, what the ramifications are of crime, but also what the ramifications are of how sentencing works, how family members who are offenders, when they're sentenced to prison terms, especially long ones, how that affects their family, how it affects the entire neighborhood. If we're not listening to any of that, what are we really doing? You can't do justice in the community without the community. And the fourth thing is do a racial bias audit that is transparent, that involves an external organization that has proven that they do these things before, and that also involves the community.
Yes.
When we started talking about this, finally, then our solicitor goes, oh, yeah, we're doing a racial bias audit too. Oh, but it's behind closed doors, and we're not telling anybody about it. And we sort of hired this outside person who's a friend of mine who just sort of is doing it for the first time and doesn't have any other clients when they're doing it. None of that engenders trust. And mistrust is the biggest part of the problem with the justice system. You can't have trust in the justice system when you have rampant systemic racism in it.
Exactly. In other words, let us figure this out behind doors, and then we'll, tell you what we come up with.
That's the same old thing. So there's this saying, really great saying, and I first heard this in our recap program. I work with the North Charleston Police Department on this community policing organization called RECAP, Rebuilding Every Community Around Peace. And the saying that we have in there is, what you do for me, without me, you do to me. So we've had that attitude too often. The person who often looks like me comes into the community and says, I'm doing this for you. But when it's without you, then it's not really for you at all.
No.
It's being done to you. So that's why the community really needs to be so engaged, why we need a solicitor who has put things in place like our community action team to ensure that we are getting continual guidance from the community. Not a one-time thing, not a meeting every once in a while, continual guidance, especially for somebody who looks like me, when I need, as a person who has grown up with an amount of white privilege, with not knowing where my racial bias was. I should have learned more along the way. We need to admit those kinds of things, but I need continual guidance too, and we need a good team to make sure that that happens. That's what's going to happen with us. We've already done it.
Yep. And that was going to be a segue into what I was going to ask you next about your CAT team. So can you just, like, where did that idea even come from? Like, that's brilliant.
It's really getting guidance from people who, starting out, people who are friends of mine. It's talking to Pastor Dixon about all the different things that we need to do. It's talking to Sam Bellamy about what the mentoring community really needs and how we make this happen. So our community action team as a whole, it's a 12-member team. It's going to be a permanent part of the solicitor's office when I'm elected. We will be meeting every 2 weeks in 2021. And then we're probably going to be opening it up to either more people on the team in 2022 or to shift out some of the people so that we get a continual influx of new voices from the community. So 12 people involved in different aspects of our community that are essentially social justice. And that's part of why it's so important. I'm so particularly glad that I'm on with you, because economic development, business development is a huge part of it. Buy Black Local is not just a nice thing. It needs to be part of our entire strategy for social justice, for reducing crime, for increasing economic success that is scalable, economic success that continues to move up, not just giving somebody a job that's a minimum wage job. That's not enough, but to allow folks to continue to expand their resources and continue to build their economic wealth. So that's one part of it. So we've got people who are involved in education, mentoring, healthcare and public health, housing, victims assistance, transportation, our LGBTQ plus community, our Hispanic Latinx community, our formerly incarcerated individual community. So we've got this network of individuals that we then connect with justice so that the justice system and the leader of that justice system, the solicitor, gets continual guidance on racial equity and gets continual guidance on how we can integrate justice programs and partner with the community to make sure that diversion programs work. That a former offender has transportation, former offender has housing resources, that we consider how their innocent family members might get housing resources. It's got to be holistic, or else it just is never going to work. So we thought we might as well do it up front.
Love it. I love it. I know most of the people on your team, so that's a thing in and of itself.
Well, like you, Candace, they're in the community. They're doing the work. There are some people who say they're from the community, say they're doing the work, but then there are people, I mean, I'm going out there and I'm shoveling mulch in Chicora, Cherokee with A.J. Davis. He is actually doing that. He's got shovel in hand doing the work. Dr. Dixon is on the street mentoring people all the time. That's who you really need, people who really know the community.
That is awesome. So I have to touch on this topic before I get offline with you. And this is like one of the most popular cases after George Floyd, which is the Breonna Taylor case. Popular and sad, someone who wanted to serve, someone who went to school to get, the education to do better in her community, gets gunned down and the only charge that sticks is that, you know, they could have shot her neighbors, you know, or they endangered other people, but she was actually killed because of no-knock, you know, warrants being in place and things like that. How can you as a DA even affect that, if at all, change for South Carolina?
There's a lot of different ways, but if we take, and this is another thing that really separates my colleague who I'm running against and me, that the old way of looking at this is saying, that's bad, we shouldn't do it, and then not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
The new way of looking at it is, okay, how do we prevent all the mechanisms that got us into that mess in the first place?
Right.
So there are a lot of different levels, as there are with many of these things. No-knock warrants, let's start there. They're generally really not a good thing, but they are necessary in some cases. So this is part of the reason we got into mass incarceration. The Supreme Court of the United States gives us an okay to use something with great discretion on rare occasion, like a no-knock warrant.
Yep.
Instead, the previous mindset has been, oh, now we've got a new tool. Yes, let's use it all the time because it's just easier, and we're going to give up on people, and we're going to assume that there are bad people out there. After all, we label people as criminals. We label them as dangerous offenders. They're probably bad people. Here's another thing that's racially biased that we hear. They're guilty of something.
Yes.
If that's your mindset, then you go, okay, no-knock warrants. Let's use them all the time. So first is it's a failure of understanding that these tools need to be used extremely rarely. They're not for everybody, and they shouldn't be used in any kind of widespread manner. A lot like prison should not be used all the time as the only tool. It should be used when it's necessary and only when it's necessary. Another part of this is that we've got this black box where nobody gets in, this hidden agenda and hidden procedure of the grand jury. We can definitely do reform work there. It's going to take working with our legislature, but we need to have the intention of actually doing some of that reform work to begin with, and opening it up. And one of the things that went on in that case is the district attorney out there is funded politically by police organizations. That's not good. We don't seek any endorsements from a couple of different groups. Let me go through them. We don't seek any endorsements of any police officer or police organization. We don't seek endorsements from criminal defense attorneys. We don't seek endorsements ever, not even ask ever, of any victim in any case because it is wrong. All those things make justice transactional.
Yeah.
They make justice something that you get if you have influence and access.
Mm-hmm.
When we've got those situations, and then suddenly Breonna Taylor's case comes up. There's a no-knock warrant that probably shouldn't have been issued. Then there's a grand jury that's cloaked in secrecy. And then we have all these political affiliations behind it. That's a massive red flag of mistrust in our justice system.
Yep.
For all these different reasons. And that's why justice doesn't work. We got to eliminate all these things that create mistrust. And the mistrust is warranted when we see results that don't match reality. So we've got to do a lot of things to prevent those kind of things that get us in those bad situations to begin with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you also about the transcripts for juries. Is that something that we do in South Carolina or not?
So I'm not sure. I want you to be more specific if you can. So jury deliberations, we don't have any transcript for jury deliberations.
Okay.
I believe that under specific court order, you can have grand juries. So there are two types of juries. There's jury for trials and juries for grand juries. A transcript is made, but it's generally not released for grand juries unless there are specific circumstances.
Okay.
I think that we need to have more transparency at every point in time.
Yeah.
There's an issue with that, and I think it takes more discussion that grand juries are generally locked down for a reason, and that's because the grand jurors, we want to make sure that they're not influenced. Generally, people don't know who a grand juror is. They're not sequestered forever, which would really be difficult. So we want to make sure that we guard their privacy. But at the same time, there's a whole lot more that we could be doing by generating community engagement ahead of time.
Right.
So a system that is trustworthy overall, which allows us to worry less about some of those interactions. If we had more of the more obstacles to prevent police associations making huge donations, PAC money coming in from dark money, then we'd have a political setup that was more of the community and less of special interest groups, which are then going to try and influence the process, especially when police officers involved.
Definitely. Okay. Good deal. So we already talked about some of these things. I'm going through my little list over here of things I wanted to make sure I touch on. Another hot topic is the qualified immunity, where they they removed it out of the Supreme Court, right? Saying that, it's basically how a police can come and punch you in the face, and if it's not really impacting an actual established law, it's kind of hard to really do anything about that. Or you watch some, you watch some of the camera footage where somebody might get knocked in the face, pistol whipped or whatever. Nothing happens to that public, official for doing anything to somebody. So is there anything that you can do about that?
Well, we can advocate for getting qualified immunity off the books. I think that I know a lot of folks who are police officers, and I'm friends with police officers who are all good. All the police officers I know are friends of mine because I love and respect those individuals, and they are purpose-driven. Mm-hmm. They've got a really hard job, though. So qualified immunity is something that every law enforcement officer worries about, because they worry if they make the slightest mistake, and especially, Candace, given that we don't have adequate and proper training of our law enforcement officers, we don't have them with a work-life balance or a pay scale that's necessarily conducive to them making better decisions more of the time.
They're like teachers. The people who you the most to protect your community and to build your children, they're the ones that get paid or treated, like it's not like the job is not that important.
Yeah, and they're out there risking their lives, and we're not doing any of the other things to really improve the relationships between law enforcement and the community. So these are all, again, factors that put us in a really bad position. So I think it's got to be an ongoing discussion. I'm not a fan of qualified immunity, but I think that there are other ways that we can still establish that police officers, that we understand that there is a level of understanding that we have to have about the difficulties in their job. And I think that we can separate that, and certainly juries can separate that as well, to understand what a police officer is going through at that time. But I don't think that we need qualified immunity to do it. Let me do you one better. We have absolute immunity for solicitors and deputy solicitors, for prosecutors. Mm-hmm. That needs to go. Mm-hmm. Now, it would be nice to have a more qualified immunity, but that would leave solicitors, like what I'm trying to become, and deputy solicitors, the entire staff, open to real criticism when there are infractions there. Because right now, you can make a complaint. If it's an ethical complaint, you can say, this solicitor didn't, or they withheld evidence, and there have been accusations of that for their current solicitor. We don't hear anything about them because they're also locked down because we've got this absolute immunity. So if we had more transparency, and if we had better community relations, if we cut some of the politics out of it and the conflicts of interest, we'd be in a better situation where our entire community could trust the solicitor's office a whole lot more. But we haven't done those things.
Right.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
We haven't done any of those things.
And we know, like, after someone's in the seat for a while, you just get comfortable. Things seem like, well, nobody's complaining, nobody's crying loud enough. It's fine. It's totally fine.
That's a buddy of mine who I grew up with is he's the head of the Criminal Justice Department in North Carolina Central. Brilliant guy named Dr. Robert Brown. Definitely worth looking up. Really great journal articles too. So one of our first restorative justice forums, where we did something like this, talking about race and justice and how they're interwoven, he was saying that this is one of the major problems where you've got racial bias, is typically you've got district attorneys who've just been there forever. Yeah. Well, if there are not regular elections and regular opportunities to engage the community in that political discussion, then you're not going to have accountability. You're not going to have somebody who says, hey, look, you got to hire African-American attorneys. You got to have diverse juries. You got to do these things. People get comfortable, and then that's when it really goes off the rails.
Yeah. Well, Ben, I have 2 more questions, and we're gonna wrap up because I know we're a little.
I'll try and be shorter in my answers.
Okay. So we know that drug hits the African American community hard, and then we have where marijuana in some states is not, as much of a weight as it was before, because we have white collar crimes that happens all the time, and it's it's even bigger effects from those things, but because there's money involved there, they can pay a heavy fine ticket and, go on with life. Whereas someone else, they have no options but to have, spend time in jail. Is there anything that we're going to be doing with helping these small time drug dealers? I know you touched on it a little bit, but will we ever get to a point to be one of the states where marijuana is not like as big of a deal as it was in the past? Yeah,
I think that especially since we've got really good up and coming leadership in the legislature, and that's one of our community action team members is Crystal Matthews. I'm not sure if you know Crystal, but
we're on a show next week.
Yeah, she's dynamite. I mean, really, she's just dynamite. But I think that we've got legislators who are going to be continuing to push for that. I think that we've gotten more bipartisan support than it may look like for just making marijuana legal in South Carolina. I think that there are really good public health reasons for that. We're trying to, with our community action team, build partnerships with public health, which includes mental health, to understand that a lot of drug crimes, those nonviolent crimes where there's not really a victim, are driven often by poverty, by community stress, which is a real thing, a generational thing, especially in historically redlined, racially biased neighborhoods, racial bias redlining. De jure segregation is another term that we use for that. We know that it's a huge problem in those areas, and poverty, mental health, stress, other kinds of health issues all play into that. People a lot of times use marijuana or other drugs or opioids as part of their pain medication, essentially, because it's cheaper and it has less side effects and other things. But we're criminalizing this. I will say one thing about my colleague. I try and think of my opponent as a colleague, that we're going to do the right thing here together. I think that she's a well-intentioned individual, and I believe, we don't have absolute facts on this, but that she has basically stopped prosecuting marijuana. I think that we need to be more overt about and more public about our advocacy on that, to say here out in public, we're just going to tell you, no, we're not prosecuting marijuana possession. It's just, no, we're not doing it.
Right.
I do think that we need to track it, which is why I think citations are the way to go. The reason I want to track it is because we're creating these partnerships with public health. And when we see that kind of low-level drug use go up in a community, it's an indicator of other stresses on that community: economic stress, transportation, education, housing stresses. And if we really want to solve the problem of crime and violence, as we say on our community action team, reduce crime, increase justice, we've got to know that there's more stress on the community, and that's a sign that it's going on.
Wow. Great point and great idea on that. And lastly, all that we talked about tonight, all of the information that you shared, if no one really has interactions with police or criminal justice, why would they even care about who they should check on that box when it comes on November 3rd, or if they go vote early or whatever? Why should they even care?
Candace, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
Yeah.
When we don't have a justice system that people can trust, then that's when you get injustice. Racial inequity is a form of injustice. So it doesn't matter where you live in the Charleston area, whether you're from North Charleston, which is where I live, or in Mount Pleasant, where I used to live, whether your neighborhood, you perceive it as one where there's a lot of crime or a little crime. If we don't have a justice system that is there for everyone, then it's not really there for anyone. And we talk about the differences between justice for all and justice for those who have access and influence.
Yeah.
That's what we've got right now. A lot of folks who are in communities that are historically redlined, that are segregated, where you don't have the resources that you need, don't have economic resources, et cetera, et cetera. Folks in those neighborhoods can't just pick up the phone and call a friend who is a lawyer. Mm-hmm. If you're in a really wealthy neighborhood, which is undoubtedly in South Carolina primarily white, then you probably have 1 or 2 phone calls that you need to make before you reach a lawyer who won't even charge you to talk about your problem.
Right.
So that's unequal access. Mm-hmm. And then if you don't have the money to hire somebody, or you only have a little bit of money to hire somebody, and the more expensive lawyers have either given money to the solicitor's campaign or they just know them, and it's unequal access. That's the justice of unequal access. That's injustice for everyone. And it makes us all less safe, no matter where you are. So we got to have trust in order to have a justice system that works. We have to have the community engaged in us in order for us all to be safer.
Wow. Well, Ben, I want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you have going on, all of your visions. And I hope that the viewers on tonight, that you got a lot out of tonight's episode. There was a lot of information shared. And this is all about helping you to make a wise, informed decision when you go to the polls, and not being at the polls and then kind of iffy, not sure why you should vote for this person or why you should do something different. We are bringing it to you in your living rooms. You have no excuses. You can get the ballots at home. You can go vote early if you have to work or have something else important to do on November 3rd. So just stay informed. Follow Ben. On Facebook, you're at Vote Ben Pogue.
Vote Ben Pogue 2020 on Facebook, at Vote Ben Pogue on Twitter, and our website is votebenpogue.com. We've got a lot of really good stuff. Our restorative justice forums, if you want to take a deep dive into something, they're dynamite.
Yeah. And so on October 24th, Saturday, we will be having the African Consciousness Coalition Festival. Ben, you and Nina are invited. It's a free event. It gives you an opportunity to interact with community members, local businesses in the area. So be sure to come out. It's for everyone. African dance, food trucks, trunk or treat for the children in a safe environment. And this is how we are able to express more about African Americans in the community. And this year's theme is graffiti. So it's like we get to tell our own story in beautiful and vibrant colors about who we are as people.
This is fantastic. Can't wait.
Definitely. All right. So make sure you vote, get out there, share this video. Also, one last thing, shout out to Dwayne Pierce, Chef Dwayne.
Yes.
You are one of the viewers and you're still watching right now. Put on there, still type in the comments that you're here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a raffle to see who wins the dinner that he's going to give away for the viewers on tonight. So
my wife better be.
Yeah. Nina is on here. She's on here. So I will definitely put your names in the raffle. All right. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure you like and share this video. It's your girl Candace signing off for South Carolina by Black Locally, and attorney Ben Pogue signing off for Vote for Ben for Solicitor or DA. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks, Candace.
Thanks, Ben.
SCBBL show. Rock on, rock.